Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The Russian Defense Ministry claims its air defenses has destroyed 73 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 3 targeting Moscow with 31 intercepted over the Bryansk region near the Ukrainian border. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin reported no casualties or damage as emergency services examined fallen drone debris. U.S. Republicans have now approved President Donald Trump's plan to slash $9 billion in funding for foreign aid and public broadcasting, framing it as a move to prioritize American interests, while the lawmakers vowed that this was only the beginning of broader spending cuts. Meanwhile, President Trump has threatened to sue the Wall Street Journal, News Corp, and Rupert Murdoch over a report claiming he wrote a sexually suggestive letter to Jeffrey Epstein in 2003. According to media reports, Trump denounced the story as fake and defamatory on his Truth Social, amid growing scrutiny of his past ties to this late sex offender. Brazilian President Lula da Silva has slammed U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to impose a 50% tariff on Brazilian imports starting in August, calling it unacceptable blackmail and vowing not to take orders from any foreigner. The escalating trade spat follows Trump's claims of unfair practices and treatment of ex-President Bolsonaro. Taiwan will not provoke confrontation with China and does not seek conflict, Taiwanese Vice President Hsiao B-Kim said while condemning Beijing's aggressive military posturing as counterproductive. While speaking in Taipei, Hsiao stressed that Taiwan's peace-loving people reject China's claims over the island. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned that up to 11.6 million refugees may lose access to humanitarian aid due to severe funding cuts. According to Dominique Hyde, UNHCR's Director of External Relations, speaking today, Hyde called the situation dramatic and urged donors to act to prevent a worsening humanitarian crisis. U.S. Senator Tom Cotton has requested clarity from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Microsoft's reported use of Chinese engineers in maintaining U.S. military cloud systems. The move follows a ProPublica report revealing that these engineers often lack the technical expertise to monitor for cybersecurity risks. India's central bank is set to finalize climate risk disclosure rules for banks by fiscal year 2027 to 2028. This push for green transparency comes as global giants like JP Morgan, Citi, and HSBC scale back climate commitments following U.S. President Donald Trump's re-election. Israel has announced the delivery of urgent humanitarian aid to Syria's Druze population in Sweida, amid ongoing violence and a worsening crisis in the region. The aid package, worth 2 million shekels or nearly $600,000, includes food and medical supplies and comes as tensions escalate following deadly clashes and controversial airstrikes. The Israeli foreign minister said the move was in response to recent attacks targeting the Druze community and was prompted in part by appeals from Israel's own Druze minority. However, Israel denied reports that it carried out fresh overnight strikes in the area, following international backlash over earlier air raids. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated that Israel's policy is focused on the demilitarization of a buffer zone from the Golan Heights to the Druze mountain, pledging to protect Druze civilians. Syria's new leadership, described by Israel as barely disguised jihadists, has rejected Israeli claims of humanitarian intent. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, who has cultivated closer ties with the U.S., accused Israel of seeking to fracture Syria and reaffirmed his commitment to safeguarding the Druze population himself. At the UN Security Council, Assistant Secretary General Khalid Kiari condemned Israel's recent strikes on Damascus, saying they violated Syrian sovereignty and undermined peace efforts in an already fragile post-conflict landscape. Let's listen into what Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Khalid Kiari, had to say.
Condemnation of all violence against civilians, including all acts that fan the flames of sectarian tensions and rob the people of Syria of their opportunity for peace and reconciliation after 14 years of brutal conflict. Citing the violation against the Druze community and pledging to protect them, between 12 and 16 July, Israel resumed and intensified its airstrikes on Syrian territory. In this respect, I echo the Secretary General's condemnation of Israel's escalatory airstrikes, including on Sweida, Dar'a, and in the center of the capital, Damascus. The strikes targeted the Damascus authorities' forces and official buildings, including the Ministry of Defense and the vicinity of the Presidential Palace, as well as the Maze military airport. In addition to violating Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Israel's actions undermine efforts to build a new Syria at peace with itself and the region and further destabilize Syria at a sensitive time. It is essential that both Israel and Syria uphold the terms of 1974 disengagement of forces agreement to preserve the ceasefire between both parties and refrain from any action that will further undermine it and the stability on the Golan.
Israel has announced the delivery of urgent humanitarian aid to Syria's Druze population in Sweida amid ongoing violence and a worsening crisis in the region. The aid package, worth 2 million shekels or nearly $600,000, includes food and medical supplies and comes as tensions escalate following deadly clashes and controversial airstrikes. The Israeli Foreign Ministry said the move was in response to recent attacks targeting the Druze community and was prompted in part by appeals from Israel's own Druze minority. However, Israel denied reports that it carried out fresh overnight strikes in the area following international backlash over earlier air raids. Now we are joined for this discussion by Professor Kobi Michael. He's a senior researcher at the INSS and Misgauw Institute, live from Israel. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. How should we interpret Israel's decision to deliver humanitarian aid to Syria's Druze community? Is it genuine outreach to protect a minority group, or is this a strategic move to build influence?
Hello, thank you for having me. Basically, there are two major reasons to the Israeli, I would say, decision with regard to this area, the Druze Mountain, or the town of Sweida. The first one is that this area is included in the buffer zone, in the area that Israel perceives as a security zone without any presence of military forces, and therefore, in order to prevent the entrance of military forces, and in order to prevent or to contain, to minimize the activities of some armed militias there, Israel decided to react. The second reason is the commitment that Israel has towards the Druze community. This is, I would say, a historical commitment and a moral commitment. And we have to remember that there are family relations between the community, the Druze community of Sweida, and the Druze communities in Israel. They are relatives. And Israel, as a state, is committed to the Druze community in Israel, and therefore Israel decided to react. And I hope that it will be ended soon without any need for further Israeli reaction.
And Professor, now with Syria's leadership, Ahmed al-Shara accusing Israel of trying to fracture the already fragile country, and also UN condemning recent Israeli airstrikes, could this aid initiative deepen regional polarization or trigger broader international criticizing of Israel?
I would say that it is a bit ridiculous. First of all, Israel has a very solid interest to engage with the Syrian regime and to assure its stability and to reach to some understandings with regard to security matters and even beyond. President Trump said it, and President Trump actually aspires or wants to bring Syria to the framework of the Abrahamic Accords. But in the very same time, Israel has some security concerns with regard to its borders and with regard to its, I would say, interests. And in the very same time, this regime controls only something like 1/3 of the Syrian soil. All the northern part of the Syrian soil is eventually occupied by the Turks, more than 3,000 square kilometers, and most of the eastern part of Syria is not controlled by al-Jolani, but by the Kurds, by SDF. And the south of Syria, the area of Daraa, which is close to the Israeli border, is not controlled by the Syrian regime as well. And Israel is concerned about this area because this is the closest area to our borders. So to say that Israel eventually causes the fragmentation of Syria, it's something which I assume is a bit ridiculous.
And Professor, you also mentioned that Israel has its own Druze population, and now Syria also has Druze population. Are they related? Are they same Druze population? And how is now internal domestic pressure within Israel shaping foreign policy when it comes to Druze population? Yeah.
There is no doubt that it affects and it influences the Israeli government and the entire Israeli society. We have no time now to elaborate on the historical bonds between the Druze and the Jews in this country, but this historical bond, these historical relations began even before the establishment of the State of Israel. In the pre-State of Israel, we are talking about a bond that has been established since the 30s of the last century. So Israel is very, very committed, and the Druze are considered to be very loyal to the State of Israel. They accept the idea that the State of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. They are willing to sacrifice their life for the security and for the sake of this Jewish state. They are, I would say, part of the Israeli society. They are very respected by the Israeli society. They are deeply embedded in the Israeli society. And in the very same time, their relatives and their family relations with the Druze in Syria are very critical for them, and Israel cannot ignore that.
Thank you very much, Professor Kobi Michael, for joining us today and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. EU countries have signed off on a new package of sanctions on Russia over the war in Ukraine, including lowering a price cap on Moscow's oil exports. The 18th round of economic punishment against Russia since its 2022 invasion was approved This was approved after Slovakia dropped a weeks-long block following talks with Brussels over separate plans to phase out Russian gas imports. As part of the new sanctions designed to sap Russia's war chest, diplomats said the EU has agreed to lower its price cap on Russian oil exported to third countries around the world to 15% below market value. That comes despite EU allies failing to convince US President Donald Trump to go along with the plan. That comes despite EU allies failing to convince. Let's listen into what Benjamin Haddad, Minister of Delegate for European Affairs of France, has to say about the latest sanctions.
Et donc la seule façon de pouvoir mettre fin à cette guerre, de remettre les parties autour de la table des négociations et de créer les conditions d'une paix juste et durable en Europe, c'est d'accroître fondamentalement la pression sur la Russie sur le plan militaire en continuant les livraisons d'armes à l'Ukraine qui se défend courageusement et sur le plan économique avec les sanctions. Et ce 18e paquet de sanctions est une avancée majeure. Il y a eu un effort diplomatique considérable qui a été fait par la France avec ses partenaires pour son adoption.
Commenting on the new sanctions, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France has said that France has played a key role in this decision together with the United States and said that it will compel Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire. Now we're joined by Glenn Grant. He's an ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defense Minister, joining us live from Latvia. Thank you, Glenn, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, what's your analysis? Do you think this is effective, this new sanctions, 18th round of sanctions that is targeting Russia's oil exports more aggressively?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to ask yourself is, if sanctions are supposed to work, why are we now on the 18th round? Why didn't the first, second, 15th, 16th rounds work? Your answer is, of course, that sanctions are only part of the deal to actually to get anything happening. This particular round is targeting oil. It's targeting financial institutions. Although I can't quite yet find out exactly what they're targeting in that, and it's also targeting the ships that are carrying the Russian oil. The thing that you have to remember is that the prices that they're talking about now of a lower price of 47.6 per dollar for the dollar is only a small amount reduced from what it was previously. Russia can produce oil in most places around about $40 for the gallon. So they've still got capacity, but that's only the production cost. Russia needs about $90 for each gallon sold to actually to cover the cost of the war. And their problem is that there are other countries at the moment that are taxing their oil less than Russia, so they can sell more cheaply.
And given that some EU member states like Slovakia was initially resisting the sanctions, and also US under President Donald Trump declined to support this price cap, how concerned are you about cracks in Western unity?
I think I'm less concerned about cracks in Western unity because there's been cracks all the way through this war. I'm more concerned about the inability of the European Union to actually to enforce its sanctions, because it's no good having a sanction if then China just goes around the outside and delivers money to Russia by another means. Because I mean, there are so many countries that are helping Russia, whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's Switzerland, that it's extremely difficult for the European Union to actually put its finger on top of these things and make them happen. And it's more difficult if America doesn't play, because it's the American financial system that actually has the real clout in the world in enforcement. And without Donald Trump backing things, that makes enforcement 10 times more difficult.
And Glenn, now lastly, with the new sanctions aiming to phase out Russian energy from Europe, how is Ukraine coordinating with its European partners to ensure continued military and economic support amid the long-term energy and security realignment?
It's interesting. I don't think those two things are related at all at the moment, because we've seen all, the ups and downs with oil, with Slovakia, with Hungary, and people still taking Russian oil. I mean, the European Union at the moment is still giving more money to Russia than it's actually giving to Ukraine for this energy thing. So they've got a lot of work to do to cut down the amount of hard cash that Russia gets from European Union countries on oil. But support for Ukraine is like a totally separate matter. So I don't think the two are linked sufficiently strongly for reductions in oil to Russia to make much difference to what goes on with Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Grant, for joining us today and sharing your insight as an ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defense Minister all the way from Latvia. Now we have a breaking news. Russian lawmaker has warned that WhatsApp could be added to the list of companies or IT companies from unfriendly countries facing restrictions in Russia. The legislator emphasized that WhatsApp should prepare to exit the Russian market soon. This comes as Russia promotes its homegrown messenger service, Max, which is expected to gain market share if WhatsApp pulls out. Now we move on to our next news. Iran has rejected European calls to reactivate United Nations sanctions, warning that the Europeans have no legal or moral grounds to do so. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi conveyed this message during a recent call with his British, French, and German counterparts. As well as the European Union's foreign policy chief, the Europeans have threatened to trigger snapback sanctions by the end of August if no progress is made in renewed nuclear talks. Araghchi stressed that any further negotiations will only be possible when all parties are ready for a fair and balanced agreement. This comes amid increased tensions following Israeli and U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities last month, which had effectively halted previous negotiations. With the 2015 nuclear deal set to expire in October, the deadline for invoking the snapback clause is fast approaching. Now we move on to our next news. A tragic incident unfolded in Somerset when a school coach carrying over 60 passengers, mostly children, veered off the road and overturned, resulting in the death of one child. The vehicle was returning to Minehead Middle School after a day trip when it slid down an embankment and landed on its roof. Avon and Somerset police responded to the crash around 3 p.m., declaring it a major incident. Emergency services rushed to the scene with more than 21 people taken to hospital, several with serious injuries. 2 children were airlifted for urgent medical care. Now we move on to our next news. Wells Fargo suspends China travel after one of its bankers, Chen Yu Mao, was blocked from leaving the country. According to reports, the move has sparked concerns among foreign firms about the risks of business travel to China. China's foreign ministry has responded to reports of an exit ban, insisting that the country remains welcoming to foreign business and committed to market access. In a series of statements, a ministry spokesperson said China welcomes companies from the U.S. and other countries to invest in the Chinese market and will continue to offer a market-oriented, law-based environment. Not only that, but China also reiterated its commitment to high-standard opening up and stressed that the rule of law applies to both Chinese and foreign nationals in China. When pressed on the specific case involving the Wells Fargo employee, The spokesperson said they were not familiar with the matter. The comments come amid growing tensions over exit bans on foreign nationals in China and following U.S. calls for greater clarity and legal due process. Now we are joined for this discussion by Andrew KP Long. He's a China strategist joining us live from London. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry claims commitment to rule of law and business-friendly environment. How do these statements align with the growing use of exit bans and legal capacity facing foreign nationals?
I think that this situation must be viewed in its both historical context and also on the ongoing rivalry and confrontation between the United States and China on many fronts. But as far as business is concerned, there is no doubt that the Chinese economy has benefited from opening it up to the outside world. Since China's leader Deng Xiaoping opened up China to the rest of the world. And there's been a wave of foreign investments in China, benefiting not only China, but to international businesses. And this is momentum is carrying on. However, there's also increased sense of national security. Of course, there are always foreign agents operating in China. And this happens not only in China, but in other countries as well. And foreign agents doesn't mean necessarily Chinese agents, but also Western agents operating across the world. So I think that each case must be looked at in its own particular circumstances. But amongst it all, there are increasing opportunities in China, especially when China is trying to double down on giving visa-free access to a dozen of Western countries in recent months, suggesting China wants the outside world to see more of China, not only in the major cities, but even in the provinces. But also, after the COVID pandemic, China really wants to open up a lot of its sectors, particularly on such sectors as maybe education, maybe wealth management, and this is positively received by foreign businesses. And the American Chamber of Commerce recently published its a recent survey. It's out only last week, and it paints a picture of a calibrated kind of view. In the sense, there are opportunities there, but of course, foreign businesses should be aware they're operating in, of course, in a foreign country with laws, of course, pertaining to national security and other issues in the host countries, and they should be mindful of that. But I think that overall, it's a false narrative that China wants to drive out foreign businesses. By no means. China do welcome foreign businesses, and foreign businesses continue to benefit from investing in China. It's just that both sides need to be aware of where they're coming from, and of course the increasing confrontation and rivalry between the United States and China across the board.
Thank you very much, Andrew KP Long, for joining us and sharing that insight as in China strategist. Now we move on to our next news. An uncontrolled wildfire has burned outside of Madrid, sending a giant cloud of smoke over the Spanish capital. The fire broke out in the town of Sweida in central Spain's Castile-La Mancha region, around 30 miles southwest of the capital. Local authorities urged residents to stay home and close their windows. Spanish authorities said the blaze had burned around 3,000 hectares by the late evening. Firefighters deployed on the ground and in the air are working to extinguish the fire. More than 95 firefighters have been deployed to deal with the blaze. Dozens of people have been forced to evacuate their homes as the Spanish Civil Guard was deployed to protect residents from the fire. Now let's take a look at some stories from the world of business. Mark Zuckerberg, along with current and former Meta Platforms directors and officers, has reached a settlement Thursday in Delaware over shareholder claims totaling $8 billion. The lawsuit centered on allegations that they harmed the company by repeatedly violating Facebook users' privacy. No financial or settlement terms were disclosed, and defense attorneys made no courtroom statements. Chancellor Kathleen McCormick of Delaware's Court of Chancery paused the trial on its second day and praised both sides for resolving the dispute. Burberry reported a milder than expected 1% drop in comparable retail sales for the quarter ended June 28, signaling early signs of recovery. Under CEO Josh Schulman, the British luxury brand is leaning into its heritage style to regain customer interest amid economic uncertainty. As part of its turnaround plan, Burberry will cut 20% of its global workforce, a bold cost-saving move that has received investor approval. Qatar's Mayhoola Fund and Gucci owner Kering are reportedly exploring a sale of their joint stake in luxury brand Valentino. The move comes as Kering reassesses its assets amid rising debt, weakening demand in the luxury sector, and underperforming shares. Kering acquired an initial 30% of Valentino in 2023 for $1.7 billion, with plans to purchase the remaining 70% by 2028. Asian markets rose, tracking Wall Street gains as strong U.S. economic data and corporate earnings helped ease concerns over tariffs. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 and Nasdaq closed at new record highs, boosted by solid retail sales and jobless claims. Meanwhile, Netflix beat second quarter earnings expectations thanks to part to a weaker dollar, though its stock fell in after hours trading. European markets also look set to open higher. Coca-Cola may soon shift to using cane sugar in U.S. products instead of high fructose corn syrup. Following talks with President Donald Trump, he claimed the company agreed to the move after discussions with Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been pushing for cleaner ingredients through his Make America Healthy Again campaign. Coca-Cola says it will share more details soon, though experts warn the switch could be costly and disrupt U.S. agriculture. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.